Slideshow. In this presentation, we'll be discussing Peabody Energy, formerly America's largest coal company, and this is an evaluation of systemic failure, why it has plummeted to such a low and abysmal valuation in the market. It is one of the worst companies rated by Fortune, and as a result, its shares have plummeted from an average 50-year average of $73 a share down to currently trading at $3 a share. So we're going to delve into some of the reasons why Peabody has done so poorly and see what they could have done better. Alrighty, so as we can see here within Peabody's domestic environment, it does reside in our home country of the United States. The company was founded in 1853, and as we stated earlier, Peabody grew to America's largest coal producing company and at one point the largest energy company in the market. Started in 1853, it started to lose a little bit of market share in the 40s and 50s, around the time that the Great World War II, unfortunately. As a result, oil was becoming the law of the land, and Peabody did seek to diversify by a series of strategic mergers, one with Upton Sinclair. This happened in the 1950s. It did monopolize the U.S. market share for the coal industry, and despite doing this, despite the monopoly, it kept coal costs low. But since the 70s, the U.S. government has increasingly put strict environmental regulations on fossil fuel companies in a bulwark against global warming, and this severely restricted the already archaic industry. This came to a head in 2014 when the presidential administration enacted the most expansive regulations through an interpretation of EPA authority. And shortly after this is when the valuation did do its precipitous drop all the way down to $3 a share. So it was in 2014 when Peabody really took a nosedive and has not recovered since. Emerging technologies were a factor in the crippling defeat of Peabody. I'm sure we all know about natural gas at this point. It is an abundant and energy-rich resource that is found throughout a great part of the United States geographically, and it is a, quote, clean burning fuel, so it has a lot to offer environmentally compared to Peabody. Now, as we can see on the chart illustrated here on the PowerPoint, since 2000, it's the increase in natural fuel production has increased from 50 billion cubic feet or 5 billion cubic feet per day all the way up to over 50. So additionally, in environments that are further out there, like in Arizona, there's been a huge boom for natural gas as a way to power the home, power resources, and this coupled with the regulations really created an uncompetitive environment for the dying coal industry. So this coupled with the regulations really drove Peabody into the dirt. It's not to say that it was all lost. Exports are still a way that Peabody stays moderately fluid, especially in China. China has been our largest export country, even though China itself produces 93% of the world's coal. China actually has in recent years enacted regulations that make it cheaper to import coal than actually mine the coal there in their home environment. So this is considered a, quote, win for Peabody because of their recent environmental regulations. However, it hasn't been a fail-safe. It hasn't completely rectified the problems that have gone on. And just to give you an idea of the amount that we are able to export in a year, we're able to export 315 million tons of coal every year. and that's after what we consume for our own purposes. So we are energy rich when it comes to coal. As far as it being a viable resource to power all needs, we still are reliant on a small amount of coal to power electricity to supplement the natural gas. But again, technology changes, the world changes, the government increases barriers to entry and makes things less profitable at times. So we're not as dependent on coal as we were in the 50s. Some of the hard technologies that it uses, the hard and soft technology, it uses a variety in its operations. Domestically, it uses the excavators, conveyor belts, the blasting caps within the mines, and other heavy machinery as its soft technology. The hard technologies that it utilizes are the physical coal mines themselves, the warehouses in which the coal product is stored, and generally the environment in which the coal resides, and the shipping containers from which the coal is exported. Personally, if I were Peabody, I would invest in as much hard technology as I can, simply because when you buy it, you have it. And this is what it did as a general rule, but hard technology requires soft technology, and vice versa. So they did all of that they really could, in my opinion. Opportunities that Peabody has had globally, these technologies, the opportunity for hard and soft technology are the same. The brand and the product differ in China, but Peabody also simply exports to China, and the main technology stays the same. With a desire for more coal-effective, surface to ore technology, it merged, like I said earlier, with Sinclair Coal Company. At this point, Peabody found itself in the drive to maturity phase. This is evidenced by the merger itself. Now, when you compare it to the Galbraith model, this can be interpreted as the strategy point in the STAR model, in the 5-point STAR model. This is because Peabody refocused itself and gained a strategy to allow it to diversify and specialize itself in the market. As we see now, it wasn't completely successful. They probably should have, done some strategic mergers with coal company or with oil companies, simply because, hindsight's always 20/20. There are immense regulations on the coal industry as of today. These would be classified as political and legal barriers that Peabody and the coal industry at large face. Like I said earlier, domestically, the Clean Air Act in 2014 was interpreted to give the EPA full discretion in setting carbon control standards. There was a fight, and in the end, what was considered a win for the states was that they could determine how their carbon emissions were regulated at the state level, so they could do completely coal. But as a result, it wasn't as cheap or as energy rich as oil or natural gas, and as a result, it wasn't widely used. So setting these barriers is what gave rise to the precipitous drop in valuation from $73 a share to just $3 a share, as we spoke about at the top of this presentation. Earlier about the global environment. The global environment that we chose for Peabody is the coal industry, is the coal industry of China. As far as politics go, politics is more or less a farce. It's not real in tyrannical China. Legally, though, China is, as far as we can tell, transparent about its coal regulation. As a top-down central economic planning system, China's central government in the 1980s realized that it could not efficiently sustain its production of coal or satisfy the needs of its citizens through this top-down production model. It didn't allow for any, non-state-owned enterprises to mine and produce coal. This was changed, and it allowed villages, towns, and cities themselves to create, to apply for permits to be coal-producing companies. So, as opposed to the state of China itself operating the coal companies, it was the local governments that had to bend to the will of the state, but they were able to produce for their own town and their state at large. So this was a change in the 1980s that really drove China to the biggest coal producing company in the world. As you can see, evidence throughout history of China becoming, a great power on the world sphere. You can see that this was done through an availability of energy-rich resources, such as coal, being opened up in the 80s. You really see the rise through the 90s, and I think that's. I don't agree with China's politics as far as repression, but they did allow a little bit of freedom in the marketplace here, and it really benefited their citizens. And I think that it made cheaper goods cheaper for us, and it opened them up with a variety of other things to the world sphere, which provided us with cheaper goods. So, additionally, they are our largest exporter. So we make money off of exporting coal to China at this point. So it's got its good and its bad. Business-wise, they still take our coal, and that's good. Economic theories go, I've spoke about this in the forums. I'm a fan of the invisible hand theory created by Adam Smith. This was at the birth of our nation in the late 1700s. It pretty much states that the invisible hand of the market, with each person engaging in voluntary and selfish transactions, will ultimately lead to the most efficient equilibrium in the market, benefiting the most people. So when a family acts in the self-interest of the family, and all families act in the self-interest of their own families, in a general collective market sphere, every family will do what's best for their own family, and doing what's best for the individual creates what's best for the community. Basically, when it comes to government regulation or anything that would create an artificial barrier to entry, it means that the market is the most efficient outcome, free of these regulations and interference. And Adam Smith gave rise to the true American commerce system at the founding of our country by stating these economic theories in his book, The Wealth of Nations. So before individual capitalism, there was, as a prevailing economic condition of all countries, mercantilism was the way of the day. Pretty much means that it was state-run capitalism. You can look to the Dutch nowadays to see exactly what that is, and it gave rise to capitalism. But it puts country before people, and capitalism puts people before country. And like the invisible hand theory says, if you do what's best for your family, you do what's best for the community, and what's best for you, the community, is best for your country, in my opinion. I think that this is self-evident throughout history. The Chinese market in the global sphere, as we're evaluating the global environment. Like I stated earlier, after China opened the towns and villages an opportunity to gain a coal mining license and produce their own coal, it took less than a decade, so less than 10 years, for the amount of coal mines to absolutely dwarf the United States domestic production. To give you a sense of comparison, here in the United States at the time, we had about 2,000 mines, 2,196 to be precise. At the same time, that China had 81,000 mines. So think about that, 2,200, 2,000 versus 80,000, 2,196 versus 81,000. It's an absolutely huge and drastic difference. By reducing its regulations into the market, China allowed for this unprecedented economic growth, which did propel it to not only a global supplier for coal, but also a significant player on the world sphere. And it does produce, at the time, it produced 46% of the world's coal demand for the entire world. Now, to get into another economic theory to contrast the invisible hand theory, uh, it does have a hard time when other countries don't, quote, play fair. Um, when you think about the invisible hand theory, in regards to us, we are benefiting right now from insanely cheap Chinese goods because China exports goods for nothing, which is great for the American citizens who are consumers. What's not so great is for the American workers who have lost their jobs to uncompetitive, virtually serfdom labor in China. An economic theory to contrast this is the optimal tariff theory. So what it means is you place barriers of entry into your market, and so do others. And setting these artificial barriers will balance both the economic self-interest of the country as well as the market itself. This undoubtedly leads to higher priced goods. There's absolutely no doubt about that. You're charging a tax on trades. That tax gets passed to the consumer. There's no doubt about that. Some will argue that it's cheaper to receive goods for the individual without tariffs, but without the tariffs, your market can't compete. But in the free trade scheme of things, if you're not competitive, you die. You don't. Your business fails. It can be difficult when countries set such high tariffs that it makes it impossible for you to export your own goods in voluntary, self-interest of yourself. So if you want to charge $10 for an apple, and then the country you're trying to export to charges 90% tariffs on the apple, that's going to get passed on to the consumer. So the person in the environment in which you're trying to export to wouldn't pay $10 for the apple that you want to charge. They would pay $19 for the apple to account for the cost of the tariff. That's essentially what the problem we have with some of our trade agreements now is. We are very pro free trade, other countries not so much, and as a result it makes it difficult for us to export our own natural American made goods. I'm very pro free trade. It's difficult to rectify this economic theory when there are artificial barriers in place in other competing market spheres. So just something to think about. No one answers 100% right. I personally will stick with the invisible hand theory just because I feel like that is, I feel like that is the best theory. As far as socioculture goes, the United States has generally moved away from the positive image in which it views coal. Culturally nowadays, coal is looked at as something of the past, something that only old miners are concerned with, viewed as archaic, and much of the country nowadays is worried about coal emissions and global warming. So this, coupled with the crushing regulations and cheaper, more energy efficient alternatives, it's drastically shorted Peabody's influence. We've been analyzing China, and socioculturally, China doesn't have as strong of a stance, but they have taken a stronger stance in recent past. It is still the world's largest producer for coal, despite these regulations, and it is still our biggest export country. Altogether, all these factors combined play a part in why Peabody Energy has declined into the unrelenting economic abyss from which it will most likely never, ever recover. The market is unforgiving. You have to innovate or you die. There's no two ways about it. You have to stay competitive, and if you don't stay competitive, then somebody else will. So really what I would do differently is I would diversify my assets. I would place more focus on alternative energies. Hindsight is always 20/20. There's always things that you can think that you would do in looking back, but at the time, coal was king, and they were the king of coal. So I don't fault them. I just think it's important for every industry with their disposable assets to be able to diversify and hedge their bets against, a changing economic environment. So that's personally what I would do differently. Um, but nobody knows the future, and they provided with us with a lot of energy, and they still do. The coal is still being produced. It's not as valuable as it once was or profitable, but we still use coal. We use natural gas as the majority of our natural gas production, but we still utilize coal. Um, So that's the presentation. On the following slide, you will see my references, my scholarly sources, and things I've gained in my own reading. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me or research the sources that I've used. But I hope this answers some questions about what brought Peabody to be one of Fortune's worst companies, especially from its rise at the very top of the market for many, many years. The company's been around for over 150 years. It's still clinging to life right now, but it's not doing good. So please, if you have any questions, contact me. Feel free to research my sources. But I'm here for any questions, comments, or if you want me to get into anything more elaborative, I'd be happy to answer any of those questions. So it's been a great time going through Peabody's history, and I hope you have a great day. Thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in, and take care.